5 common mistakes I see when people are making beats. What's good, y'all? My name is K Drama from Cincinnati, Ohio. I am the founder of Sound Art Technology Lab. I've been teaching music production since 2016, and I'm in my 3rd year of teaching applied music tech in the secondary educational system via Refresh Collective. Now, whether it's me working with high school students in the classroom or in times past, working with adults and teens in various classes I've taught throughout the city of Cincinnati over the years, there have been 5 common things I've noticed people seem to stumble with. They like I was just stumbling right there. These things are stumbling blocks to where they're not able to get over these hurdles, and they end up getting frustrated and quit in the middle of the process of trying to make a beat. However, these aren't astronomical mistakes. It's more workflow, and if you can commit various good production habits to muscle memory, then you'll find your workflow and your efficiency will increase. So let's get started. Mistake number 1. So one common mistake I see across the board all the time is not using the click track when making a beat. I guess in 2025, people just don't like click tracks. I come from the era where the MPC 2000 XL click track was just so iconic. I've even heard producers leave the click track in their beat. I mean, it's dope. You can even switch in Pro Tools the click track to sound like the Kai MPC 2000 XL click track. But anyway, I'm getting on a tangent. But people just don't like click tracks. But here's the thing. You need to use a click track. A click track is a guardrail. A click track is going to guide you as to how to perform rhythmically in your DAW. And even in live instrumentation, when people are playing live, I've been behind the scenes with various musicians, and they use click tracks. So whether it's live performance or it's composing a beat, making a beat, composing a track, people use click tracks. So you don't have to use the click track throughout the full beat, but at least while you're getting started with those first 1, 2, 3 sounds, you want to use a click track, because here's the thing. Even if you have rhythm, even if you're composing something and maybe rhythmically you're composing something at 75 BPM, if your DAW is set to 120 default, and you don't change that BPM, then when you play at 75 BPM and you don't have your click track on and your DAW thinks you're composing at 120, when you try to either quantize those sounds or you try to loop those sounds, either your quantizing isn't going to sound right, or over time when you're trying to loop your MIDI regions, it's just going to fall apart. It's going to sound offbeat the further the beat goes. So use a click track, which takes me to mistake number 2, which I actually didn't write this down, but I just heard myself talking about it while I was talking about mistake number 1. Mistake number 2 is not changing the BPM from the default setting in your digital audio workstation. So whether you're working with Pro Tools, Logic, FL Studio, whatever the case is, there are times where you're gonna rhythmically be playing something. You're gonna be playing your melody or your drums to a 120 BPM. But more times than not, whatever idea you have is not gonna be 120 BPM. So you're gonna wanna figure out what BPM you're playing at, and then you're gonna want to adjust your BPM from 120 to 90 or 80 or 70 or technically 60 and 120, or that's another story. But yeah, you want to change your BPM. Mistake number 3. Mistake number 3 that I see a lot is not quantizing your MIDI region. I don't quantize all the time. I think the more seasoned you get as a producer, the less you have to quantize everything. Sometimes I like things to sound more human. I don't want it to sound as robotic. I don't want the snare to hit exactly on a 2 and a 4. I want to play in a pocket more than playing, right on the 2, right on the 4, right on the 1, right on the 3. But there are definitely times where you need to quantize. Like if I'm making a certain type of beat and I got 1/16 hi-hats playing throughout the beat, I want those things to be quantized. I want them to sound tight. I want them to play in a certain pocket. If I'm doing hi-hat rolls, I'm doing 132s or 164s or 116 and a thirds, like I want those things to be tight. And so I quantize. Sometimes when you're playing piano melodies or strings or a kick drum, you want it to be quantized. And so if something sounds out of place, then quantize it. And in some DAWs, you can quantize as you're playing. That's kind of how I came up producing in the MPC. Like it will quantize as I was playing. So that's what I was used to. But in Pro Tools, I haven't quite figured out how to quantize as I go. So I quantize after the fact. But whether you quantize before or after, you're going to want to quantize when it sounds like it's not playing at the rhythm that it should. Mistake number 4. Mistake number 4 is not cutting any dead space in a sample prior to using the sample. So a lot of times people want to sample things, but there's maybe a half a second worth of dead space before in the WAV file before the sample actually starts. If you don't cut that dead space, when you press a key or you press a pad, it's not going to trigger the sound you're playing until you get to that part in the sample. But if you want it to hit as soon as you press the pad, you gotta cut the dead space. And oftentimes you see this played out when someone is trying to sample something and then they're trying to add drums on top of it. If the sample isn't starting right at the 1 and you have the BPM, if you're not looping that sample right, if you don't have the BPM of this, or a lot of times even if you have the BPM of the sample, but you don't cut any dead space in the beginning of the sample. Like if you got something from Splice or you did a BPM counter on it in Logic. If you don't have it starting right at the 1, when it ends at, the end of the 4th bar, it's not gonna loop right. And so you wanna cut that dead space prior to working with the sample. Mistake number 5. Mistake number 5, which happens more often than people realize, is not playing the bass in key. And this is a hard one. I even do this one. So oftentimes frequencies at a certain level, a certain pitch, it's just hard to detect whether you're playing at 808 in the right key. And just because the 808, you might be playing a C sharp or whatever, it doesn't mean that the way you have it sampled in there, it's actually a C sharp, or it might be detuned. There could be a lot of different things. And so you want to make sure that your 808 or your electric bass is in the right key. And one way I do this is just by pitching up what I played after I recorded. So after I play an 808 or play an electric bass, I'll take it up 4 tones, and it'll sound like a chipmunk bass, but I want to see if that note is playing at the right note, because usually I can detect a key in a higher pitch better than I can in a low pitch. And if it sounds right in the high pitch, then I'll bring it back down to the original pitch, and then the 808 is not only knocking, but it's in key. Whoops, I ran out of camera space, but man, I need to watch 5 mistakes people make when trying to make a YouTube video. But what was I saying? I was saying that when the bass, if you take whatever, y'all got what I was trying to say. Mistake number 6. Mistake number 6. Now, this was technically number 5 that I had written down, but as you heard me, I was talking out loud and realized like that number 1 was like a buy one get one free deal. So this is mistake number 5 on paper, but it's number 6. And this is a common mistake I see. It's sound selection. So producers will complain, or people who are trying to make beats, they'll complain about their beats not knocking as hard, or just not sound as professional or sounding polished. And I think one thing that people, the average person who makes beats, may not realize is that a lot of producers are using sounds that sound good out the gate. So I don't use a lot of stock sounds. Now, I'm not saying I don't use stock sounds, because there are plenty of great stock sounds, and every producer could probably tell you like 2 or 3 stock sounds that are like their go-tos that they use in every beat. But most producers, based on interviews I've watched and just my own experience and people I've seen, they're using third parties, VST. So I have, in this lab where I'm at, I have everything from Omnisphere to Native to Complete to now I'm drawing a blank, Nexus, all these different things, and they just sound good out the gate. They're processed in a way, they have effects already on them. And if you're not already good with mixing to where like you could take a sound that sounds dusty and you can polish it up with EQ or compression or reverb or whatever, then your stuff is going to sound dry, and it's not going to sound it's not going to have that shimmer or that shine that maybe a producer that you hold in high regard has in their production. So sound selection. So whether you're picking drums off of Splice, you want to pick drums that you want an 808, you want that 808 to out the gate just, and then you can tweak it and add compression or add more bass, take bass out, add distortion, these different things. But you want that 808 to sound good right out the gate. Or if you're using a piano, you want a piano that sounds good right out the gate. You're using strings, you want some strings that sound the way you want them to sound, versus having to do adding a whole lot of cosmetics to them to make them sound the way you want. So that's mistake number 5, but technically number 6. And I have a bonus mistake, which this would be mistake number 7, but on paper it's mistake number 6. Let me look at my cheat sheet here. Is making sure your loop is at an even number. So I especially see this in Logic. This is actually one of the things that frustrates me in Logic, because I come from, to give you a little history, I produced, I started out on an MPC, but then I switched, when I went digital, I